So when you hear the letters LSD, what comes to mind? Probably the 1960s, right? Counterculture, tie-dye, rock and roll. But what if I told you its most important legacy has almost nothing to do with any of that? This is the wild, unlikely story of a molecule that was made by mistake, found by accident, and ended up completely changing how we understand the human brain.
It's a story that seriously kicks off with a simple lab mistake and ends up sparking a revolution in neuroscience. So how on earth did one of the most powerful psychoactive substances ever discovered come not from some grand plan, but from a total, complete accident?
Okay, let's get right into it. The year is 1938, and our story begins in the Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. We've got a chemist, Dr. Albert Hofmann. He's messing around with derivatives of ergot, which is this fungus that grows on rye, and he's trying to create a drug to help with blood circulation. Pretty standard stuff.
So in 1938, Hofmann cooks up the 25th compound in this particular series. He calls it LSD-25. He runs some tests, nothing interesting. It doesn't seem to do much of anything. So he puts it on a shelf and it's basically forgotten. But then, fast forward 5 years to April 16, 1943, Hofmann says he got this peculiar presentiment, just a weird gut feeling, and decides to synthesize it again. And while he's working, he accidentally gets a tiny, tiny amount on his fingertips.
He started feeling a little strange, restless, and dizzy. So he heads home, lies down on his couch, and suddenly, this happens. He's plunged into this waking dream. His only guess was that it had something to do with that chemical. So 3 days later, like any good scientist, he decides to run an experiment on himself.
He deliberately took what he thought was an absolutely minuscule dose, 250 micrograms, and as he and his assistant bicycled home, the world just dissolved around him. This ride became the very first intentional LSD trip, now famously known as Bicycle Day. And what was so mind-blowing wasn't just the bizarre and powerful effects, but the sheer potency of the stuff.
Hofmann's colleagues, well, they thought he was crazy at first, but they ran the tests, and he was right. An effective dose could be as low as 20 micrograms. I mean, to put that in perspective, that is an amount smaller than a single grain of table salt. Nothing else known to science at the time was active in such an impossibly small quantity.
So you can imagine, back at Sandoz Labs, they realized they were sitting on something potentially world-changing. They branded it Delicide and started shipping it out to researchers everywhere. The thinking was, hey, this could be a huge new tool for psychiatry. Maybe it could help patients break down mental barriers, or maybe it could even give therapists a way to temporarily experience what their patients with psychosis were going through. And right away, two main schools of thought popped up. Over in Europe, they mostly went for what was called psycholytic therapy. This meant using lower doses to kind of loosen up a patient's defenses during traditional talk therapy. But in North America, they went big. They called it psychedelic therapy, using a single, massive dose to try and induce a mystical, life-altering experience, hoping it could just jolt people out of things like alcoholism.
And get this wasn't some fringe idea. The scientific world went all in. By the early 60s, we're talking over 1,000 scientific papers, with studies involving around 40,000 patients. For a moment there, LSD really looked like it might be the next great breakthrough in mental health care. But as the drug started leaking out of the lab and into the wider culture, the whole story was about to take a very sharp turn.
By 1970, the party was over. The cultural backlash hit hard, and LSD was slapped with the most restrictive classification possible, Schedule 1. That classification basically means it's seen as having no medical value and a high potential for abuse. And just like that, it brought all legitimate research to a screeching halt for the next 40 years. The science was frozen in time.
But you know what's crazy? The story doesn't end there. In fact, you could argue that LSD's single greatest contribution to science had already happened. It was a discovery that would forever change the way we think about the brain.
Okay, now this is where things get really cool. Take a look at these two molecules. On the left, you've got LSD. On the right, you have serotonin, a chemical your own brain makes and uses every single second. Look closely. Do you see it? A huge piece of the serotonin molecule is literally nested right inside the LSD molecule. When scientists spotted this back in the 50s, it was a collective whoa moment.
And I can't overstate how huge this was. Before this point, mental illness was seen almost purely through a psychological lens. Your childhood, your experiences. The idea that it could be about brain chemistry was pretty radical. LSD was the first hard proof that a microscopic amount of a chemical could totally flip your reality on its head. And that led to an even bigger idea. What if our normal reality is also run by brain chemistry?
And this was the hypothesis that just blew the doors open.
Think about it. Just 1 year after serotonin was even discovered in the brain, researchers made this leap. The bizarre effects of LSD weren't magic. The drug was probably just hijacking the brain's own serotonin system. That one single insight laid the foundation for pretty much all of modern psychiatric medicine.
All right, let's jump forward to today. After decades of being locked away in a scientific freezer, researchers are finally able to study LSD again. Only this time, they have tools like fMRI scanners, technology that Albert Hofmann couldn't have even imagined in his wildest dreams. First, let's just clear the air on safety. That number you see? 0. That is the number of documented deaths ever caused directly by a toxic overdose of LSD. Now, of course, people can do unsafe things and have accidents while they're impaired. That's a real risk. But the substance itself is considered physiologically one of the safest drugs known. Its toxicity is so low, it's actually hard for scientists to even measure.
So what are our new brain scanners telling us? Well, for one, under LSD, parts of the brain that normally operate independently suddenly start chatting with each other like old friends. At the same time, the default mode network, which you can kind of think of as your brain's me network, the part that handles your sense of self and daydreams, it gets quiet. This lines up perfectly with reports of ego dissolution, that feeling of oneness with the universe. Overall, the brain's activity becomes way more complex and less rigid. And now we know for sure it's all happening because LSD is hitting a very specific serotonin receptor, the 5-HT2A receptor.
And this new research is showing some serious therapeutic promise. Check out this chart. It's from a small, recent study where LSD was used in therapy to help patients who were dealing with extreme anxiety because of life-threatening illnesses. And as you can see, the group that got the LSD-assisted therapy had a huge, lasting drop in their anxiety levels compared to the placebo group. So this all leads us to the big, looming question. Where is this all going? Is this just a fascinating scientific curiosity, or could we be looking at something bigger? And here's why this matters so much right now. For many of the biggest mental health challenges, like depression, anxiety, addiction, we haven't had a truly new kind of treatment in decades. Psychedelics aren't like a pill you take every day. The idea here is to use them as a catalyst, a tool inside a controlled therapeutic setting to open a window for deep, meaningful, and hopefully lasting change. From a forgotten chemical on a lab shelf, to a symbol of cultural revolution, to a key that helped us unlock the chemical secrets of the brain, the story of LSD is one of the most unexpected journeys in all of science. And now, as it finally comes back into the lab, you have to wonder if its final chapter might just be its most important one of all.